Very excited about this week's podcast. We're going to talk about when winning matters, lessons learned from elite sport. And with me is Stephen Bird, Associate Professor of Exercise Science. How are you, mate?
I'm great. I'm looking forward to unpacking some of the theories that we have in when winning matters.
Oh, who doesn't want to know about that? Let's rip in.
Welcome to the Body Science Podcast. As always, the information contained in this podcast is for the information purposes only and is not designed to diagnose or be prescriptive to treat, prevent, or manage any injury, disease, or other health-related condition.
Welcome to Body Science HQ, the world of fit, happy and healthy. And this week I'm going to add on the end of that, lessons learned from elite sport. And it's all about when winning matters. Like, it's your book and Stephen's come on board to talk about sport. He's very rarely do we get to get an insight with someone who's in elite sport. Everybody wants to play in that area. And not only have you had your fingers in that playing the game, you've also got those fingers back out and written a book, When Winning Matters. So, and you've dropped the second line on there, lessons learned from sports elite. So do you want to, before we start, do you want to jump in and just tell us a little bit about yourself and then we'll rip in?
Yeah, certainly. I think I have a little bit of a different story where people look at, my work within academia in the university setting, and that was something that was never really on my radar. Like, I left school at a very young age. School was an inconvenience to my sport, and then applied for several jobs along the way, you name it, Institute of Sports, professional teams, all of those opportunities, and would always receive the lovely, "We regret to inform you" letter because I didn't have a university degree. The long story of that was some 13 years later, I had the opportunity then to go to university.
13 years.
From leaving school at 15 to go into university when I was 28, and then was able to complete an undergraduate degree, an honours degree in chronobiology, and then my PhD in sports nutrition and exercise endocrinology. So when I get now the opportunity, which I love, is to go back to my previous high school where I left at a young age and talk to what they would call the challenge students, that school might not necessarily be their main focus right now. And it's great to go back and have opportunities to talk to those students and those, youth of today about, man, your learning never stops. It just might take a different direction.
Yeah, I love that. I truly love that. Mate, what was the big thing that changed you from being a terrible student at school to suddenly being able to, because universities and going on to do your PhDs, it's a fairly rigid structure.
Yeah, absolutely it was. And look, at school, at high school, my number one thing was sport. That was it. I was there to play sport. And when I was actually in year 10 doing work experience at a gym, and you will relate to this, no doubt, that was back in the day when gyms were gyms. Leg warmers and G-strings. What a wonderful place to be for a 15-year-old.
Just let me sit back and reflect on that for a second. I'm old. I've got that picture in my head loud and clear. Exactly.
So back then it was, a lot of these gyms were run by bodybuilders, martial artists, boxers, people that were unreal at their trade, as in their sport or their discipline, but maybe not the best business people. So I was doing work experience at a gym, and into that work experience, the gym owner came up to me and said, look, would you like a job here? So as any, good 15-year-old, I raced back to my mum and said, they've offered me a job at the gym, but I think I'll stay at school. And my mother said, why do you want to stay at school? And I said, well, I want to be the youngest open boys footy captain at the school. And my mother had said, that's probably not the best reason to stay at school. Take the job. So I left there and then, my no school certificate, no HSC, started working at the gym. And I'm talking about, we're doing everything. I'm vacuuming floors, I'm cleaning mirrors, I'm cleaning the urinals, I'm learning aerobics, I'm learning martial arts. And that's where it all started. But I always had this inquisitiveness around training. How can you make yourself perform better? And just ended up, really being drawn to athletic populations, like-minded people that wanted to succeed, and was training every athlete that I could think of. And that all came to a head in 1998 at the Commonwealth Games in Kuala Lumpur, where Australian boxing was the first time taking a trainer with them to the games. At that point, I was actually training 4 of an 8-man Australian amateur team with their strength and conditioning work. They were calling for a trainer. I thought, geez, I've got to be in with a show here, right? I'm training half of these guys. And once again, received a lovely, "We regret to inform you" letter. Yep. So that was the impetus. That was, okay, if I really want to pursue this and make, as my father would always tell me, and find your passion, make it your profession, and you'll never work a day in your life.
Love that.
And so that was the moment. And at this point, I'm 28 and I've been, doing fitness courses and whatever you could along the way. But now you're talking about going to university. And so I did. So I went to Charles Sturt University in Bathurst, had a meeting with the head of the program, Professor Frank Marino, and he set me down and said, look, mate, we're going to give you a shot, but it's going to be a challenge, right? You need to put in some effort. They had an associate student program, which meant you pay upfront in full for 4 subjects. You're not enrolled and you do all the work. They'll keep your grades. And if you show, an aptitude, then they'll offer you a spot. So that was the moment. Started, and I'll never forget it. First lecture, 3 hours, anatomy and physiology. Professor Marino was taking the lecture, and it was 3 hours on the skull.
Wow.
Apparently there's a few bits in there that we need to know about. So I was very much how am I going to remember this? How am I going to learn this? So I had to work with a lot of different people, a lot of support to work, how do I learn the best? So what strategies helped me retain that information? And then I was fortunate to finish my undergrad, then go on to do a research degree in chronobiology, and then was awarded an Australian postgraduate award to do my PhD in what ended up being sports nutrition.
Amazing. What a great story.
So look, I think the thing that you find as you go through that journey, and I think whether we're talking athletics, where we're talking semi-pro, pro, where we're talking corporate, everyone has a different journey to get to where they're going. And I think that's the defining difference. And as we get towards the book and When Winning Matters, the title of When Winning Matters is a little bit of a wordplay. As you'll know, when you get to the end of the book, you'll realize that it's not about what's on the scoreboard. It's about those individual victories that you win along the way to help you become the best version of yourself possible.
Yeah, nice. And did the book come from, driven by your time? Like, did athletes bring you to the same thinking process you went through? Like, I really need to tell people about this. It's not the 2 points for the week. It's not the scoreboard. Like, did you, like, you watch all these docs that are coming out on Jordan and there's lots of them out there. And you look at each of these people and you go, that guy was different to everybody else. And is that what caused you to go down the path of a book? Was there a turning point that went to you putting pen to paper?
Yeah, look, I need to give a shout out to the co-author, Rob Beveridge. Bevo and I have worked together for over 10 years. And the story behind that was I just finished a year at the Penrith Panthers with a research program in restructuring their fatigue monitoring and recovery management protocols in 2012. Yep. We had a research group within there doing the work. It was Matt Ryan was the head of performance at that stage at the Panthers, and that was going well. We were fortunate enough to win a significant research grant to continue the work on. And then as it does in elite sport, a change of sponsorship with another university, and then I was unable to continue with my association with the university that we received the grant. So here I was with some significant funding and no team to continue the research.
Oh, wow.
I had just been asked to fly over to Perth to assist with Basketball WA with their youth program. And I mentioned it to a guy there, Brett Coxedge, who I'd worked with as the high performance manager at the Western Region Academy of Sport for 10 years. I said, mate, who do you know at Freo or one of the teams over here, West Coast Eagles? And he said, don't worry about that. I'm going to sit you down with Rob Beveridge. He's the head coach of the Perth Wildcats, and we're going to have a chat with Bevo. I met Rob that night. We had a chat, which ended up being all night and half the next day. And within that organisation, and we'll talk a little bit about the Perth Wildcats shortly, but suffice to say, within 48 hours, I had a written contract to then look after research and innovation with the Perth Wildcats after that meeting. So those organisations where they value those add-on benefits to provide the best environment for their athletes, they just get things done. So I've been with Bevo for 10 years. So we had that program there. Bevo arranged for me to work with the Townsville Crocodiles as the head of performance in the NBL. Then moved on from there to assist Bevo with his role. He was head coach of the Illawarra Hawks for 3 years. Throughout that time, Bevo was then given the head coaching role for Scotland basketball at the Commonwealth Games. Okay. So then I was fortunate enough to work in that program with him. So it's one of those things, as you know, in elite sport, a lot of staff end up and follow coaches. Yeah. And when the coach moves on, generally some of the staff will probably move with them, so to speak. And so through COVID, when the COVID situation started, I'd always been chatting to Bevo going, I think, we collectively, we could share some really positive messages in a book. COVID hit and I said, okay, this is the time. I want to take what we can now and try and make that resonate into people's lives based on all of these principles and what we do to create successful environments with elite sport. We can apply this and hopefully the readership will resonate with some of that things within their life. And so we went and met with the publisher in the February, and we had the first complete draft in the June. Wow. And then in the July, we had it off to print, and then in the August, we had it released. So once we had decided that this was the path we were going to go, both Bevo and I put in some time to get the book done.
That's amazing. Like it's, I've spoken to a lot of authors. It normally doesn't roll quite as cleanly or as quick. Are you a natural?
I'll be the first, and my wife will tell you. I do have a little bit of OCD with things. I'm very goal oriented. I need a plan.
To be good though.
I have a mind map on the wall with things that need to happen and how they need to happen. And I was fortunate that, and you know what it's like, Greg, you often end up being drawn to people similar to yourself with whatever you're putting out in the world. You end up around, you're in business, you've got the best staff in the world, and that's not by accident, right? So then when Bevo was the other partner in this venture to write the book, we both were sort of pushing each other pretty hard to make sure that the end result encapsulated all of the experiences that we've had, 4 Olympic Games, World Championships, World Cups, Commonwealth Games, Asia Cups, Southeast Asian Games, those environments. And it's not a book that's about coaching. It's a book about different principles. And when we've gone into a particular environment, what was the one principle that we had to try and employ within that environment, and then, create a successful environment for the team and the structure that they were using. So, and we can touch on some of the particular chapters, but some of the chapters that resonate the most at the moment with a lot of our work in corporate world now revolve around a chapter which is called The 1%ers That Count. That chapter's received a lot of interest across the board, and we're workshopping that chapter pretty hard at the moment.
I believe that's the note when you sent the book to me. The note was, make sure you read this chapter. Yeah. So look, you've brought it up. Let's talk about it. What does that mean?
Look, I think everyone is familiar with the concept of the 1%ers, right? Now, I can tell you though, what people are not familiar with is where that concept actually arose. Mm-hmm. Everyone just thinks about sport when they hear that, but it actually was in the early 1920s, and you're talking about Chicago, bikie gangs. There was a lot of unrest in that time, and it came out from the American Motorcycle Association actually put out a press release saying that it's 99% of the bikers out there are really good, but there's this group, the 1%ers.
The 1%ers, is that right?
And that's where the term actually comes from, right?
Wow.
So way back when, from the American Motorcycle Association. However, now it's linked to success in sport. That's the defining difference, the 1%ers that count. And with our experiences with Bevo, we've, we're talking thousands and thousands of athletes that we've had the opportunity to be a part of their journey. And when we go back and we looked at doing a thematic reduction of, what those athletes told us were the most important 1%ers that they perceived to make a difference to them. When we went through all of that data, there were 7 key themes that came out of that data.
Yep.
But interestingly, the top 5 were all psychological based strategies.
Is that right?
So when you look at everything that's out there, the sports elite have identified the 5 most important factors that they deem to be the 1%ers that count for them. And they're all psychological based strategies, from things like as simple as goal setting. And we'll unpack that a little bit, but you're looking at goal setting, you're looking at mindfulness, you're looking at anchoring, you're looking at self-reflection, and you're looking at self-regulation. So you look at those types of areas, they're all psychological strategies to help athletes, and they all are linked predominantly to an athlete's ability to cope under pressure.
Wow, that's really interesting. Was there a lot of crossover of those 5 between athletes as well?
Yeah, look, usually there was. And then remiss of me, the other 2 to make up the 7, sleep was, obviously, and recovery. And it was great listening to the previous podcast with Clint talking about our recovery points checklist. And that's been used extensively at the moment. So we established that in 2006 with Indonesia for the 2008 Olympic Games with the Indonesian team, and then we're able to publish that in 2011. And I'd encourage the listeners to just Google the recovery points checklist, and you'll find 1,000 different versions of it out there. But I think that's we've used that successfully across multiple teams, and it seems to be a staple now of most high performance programs will have a recovery checklist of some description.
And mate, we'll put that on bodyscience.com.au/podcasts, and check the When Winning Matters podcast out to find out the link for that. So, but will that work for an individual who, getting back to one of the things you talked about earlier was personalization, individualization, I think is the word you used. Can I grab that checklist and look at it myself, or do I need to be part of a team for that to come to play?
No, not at all. It's an individual thing. We have different types. So the initial genesis of the recovery checklist was the 100-point weekly recovery checklist. Now, when we designed that was purely designed, and the key word here that I use a lot is context. Yep. All right. So in the context of the Indonesian Olympic team, we had athletes their coaches had a significantly high training volume philosophy. So our goal was to use this as an educational tool where we challenged every athlete. And you know what athletes are like, Greg, they're very much, you give them a challenge and they like to see their name on top of the leaderboard and all that sort of stuff. So we made it pretty simple, and we challenged them to accrue X number of points per week. We looked at all of the recovery strategies that are available. We looked at the efficacy of the strategy. So, did it actually provide a physiological or psychological benefit for recovery? And then the second factor was how proactive was the athlete in actually to employ the strategy. So the strategies that have slightly more points accrued to them have high levels of efficacy and probably slightly higher levels of proactiveness from the athlete. Yeah, gotcha. But we're talking about, and that was where we started, and we've got versions now that we use in sport that are 24 or 48-hour recovery checklists. So for example, with a 24-hour recovery checklist that we're using at the moment with Basketball New Zealand, players players, they have to accrue 12 points in the 24 hours. So, and it may be that, sleep, if they have sleep extension strategies or achieve 8 hours of sleep, they'll accrue 3 points. If they do a hydrotherapy session, which is an active modality, they might get 2 points. If they just wear compression socks, they might get 1 point. So the idea is based on the training that the person is going through, whether it's rec, fitness, semi-pro, pro, depending on their level of training, they would look at accruing X number of points throughout the day. And that's fairly generic across the board, because the idea, what we're trying to instill in these athletes is a structure and a routine in order to make recovery a part of their day.
Yeah, nice. Just stepping back a bit, you first mentioned this recovery protocol came out when? In
2006.
So you've just told us what your current one is. What were you doing back in 2006?
Well, it was some of the modalities were similar, but the main difference was we took a weekly approach, given, as I said, in context, athletes, extremely high training volume.
Yep.
So we took a weekly approach and they had to accrue 100 points. So pretty much on average, we're looking at 20 points a day. And those nominal weightings for the points were what varied. So for example, if they were able to accrue, when we had 6 hours sleep, we have a lot of the athletes over there, and particularly through Ramadan, for example, they might not get necessarily high quality 8 hours sleep. So there was different nominal weightings. So some of the weightings were 15 points, some were 10, some were 5. It's just over time, we've tried to align it specifically to the context of the current environment. But every team we work with at the moment, and once again, shout out to Bevo. He's now coaching over in the New Zealand NBL with the Southland Sharks. So they've just qualified for the Final Four next weekend. And we use this with them. So those players, and you'll be able to see on my phone, those guys will be sending in their surveys today of their recovery points. And how we gamify the results in the visualization strategy, we find really useful for the players, because there's no holding back. Oh, you accrued X amount of points. All of the data is there for the players to see. And then what we find is that level of accountability in the senior playing group. Like, we don't have to chat to the players about, man, you're slightly under your recovery points. We wanted 12 and you got 6. The way that Bevo has his programs, those senior players will hold the other players accountable to ensure that they meet their minimum standards. Because one of the things we talk about in the book is your minimum standards become your highest standards.
Yeah, nice.
So we need to look at what are those minimum standards and where are we actually setting that bar across the group.
Do you find it? Do you see any correlation between the physical and the mental side? So if you see that someone's not, okay, say I'm a traditional, I get my 12 points, but I'm coming at you with 8 regularly now. Do you see a correlation to that too, stepping in with other areas of, obviously you got your team management part, but when people are on I don't want to use the word mental health, but when stress is playing its part in life, because life's way bigger than game day. Do we see the correlation? Like, is this a red flag that you use in that space as well? Yeah,
definitely. And that's a really good point. And especially given the context of where we are right now in the COVID environment. And, for us, the recovery point system is one. And the first thing I'll come back to your main question in a second, but the first point with that is we encourage athletes to use multiple strategies. Mm-hmm. So what we ask the athletes to try and avoid is just going to their favorite, right? And just doing that. So we talk about 4 particular categories. So we talk about muscular recovery. We talk about neural recovery. Okay. We talk about psychological recovery. And we talk about substrate recovery. So there are our 4 key areas for recovery. And what we would like the athletes to do, and this is where the education becomes really important, is we educate them on the recovery modalities that fall within each of those recovery areas. So ideally, we would like them to try and use one recovery modality from each of those different areas. Now, depending upon the athlete, when they do their general wellness questionnaire of a morning, and this is the part where it's quite an old cliche, right? Nobody cares about what you know until they know how much you care. Yep. And an athlete environment, it's so indicative of that. We can have the best programs in the world and work really hard to engage athletes in these strategies. But if they don't think that you care about them, like, they're just going to shut you down. And athletes are the best at smelling the BS, right? Like, they are the best. So, and you've been in environments, Greg, where you've seen athletes, and if someone comes in and it's like, my analogy would be, talking to a car salesman that knows nothing about cars. You can smell that a mile off. And athletes, they have a very uncanny knack of knowing if you're fair income, right? And I think that's a big part to it. From our work recently, we've spent a lot of time with an international collaboration in the United States, Canada, Spain, and Belgium, where we're actually researching a lot at the moment on sleep and the impact of COVID in athletic environments. We were fortunate to be invited to write an article, a blog for the British Journal of Sports Medicine on sleep and COVID in the NBA. And that followed us publishing a paper in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine, which was a little bit controversial because the title of the paper, and we'll put it in the show notes, was An Urgent Wake-Up Call for the NBA. At the moment,
was that the title of the article?
That was the title of the article. So you can imagine it was, that's sort of putting a bit out there that could be seen to be a bit controversial, right? But the best part of that paper that I'd really encourage the listeners to look at is we have a section in there called the player's voice. So this is not scientific data. This is not running, controlled studies. This is what the athletes are telling us how they feel. Now, you go and speak to any elite strength and conditioning coach and they'll say, hey, we can go and do every fitness test available and end up with all of this quantifiable data. But my number one thing would be to ask the athlete, how are you feeling today, mate? Yeah. What's going on? How's the wife? How's the kid? Those sort of questions, right? And I know if I revert back to the Penrith Panthers, when we started there with Matt, one of the first things that were changed was, okay, how many of the players in the playing group, the 25, have kids? How many of those that have kids are under 3 or under 5? So with our sleep box, those guys get priority because the chances of them having a good night's sleep is probably going to be, interrupted more so than the other guys. We have player X, his girlfriend, and they're just having their first child. Do we have a support structure around them to help with the anxiety of having their first child? So it's that care factor around the athlete where we find we get the best buy-in, and buy-in's built on trust, right? So, any successful business, they have the ability to create trust within their organization.
And do you see those strategies being, like you mentioned before, that you do a fair bit in corporate world? Is that same theory you just talked about then being pulled into corporate in a strong way, or is it still a fight to get us employees to think like that?
Not with the good organizations, right? So, and I think that's the defining difference, right? There's the best of the best. They look for opportunities to be critiqued, to find ways to make their performance, and we talk about performance globally, whether it's corporate, sport, to make their performance better. And the better organizations, they're willing to invest in that critique to find out how they can do things better. So corporate world is really opening up to that. And there's a lot at the moment around the philosophies around elite sport, the philosophies around being a winner. What are the things that drive athletes to that extreme to be able to be so focused in what they're doing? How do they situationally reframe moments that could be seen as, things are going bad, I've got that snowball effect, it's not going my way, but actually flipping that and situationally reframing it to pull the positives out of that to actually make it a good experience. So in the corporate world, I think that's the difference between, the good organizations and the others, is they're prepared to take the critique and then move forward.
I love that. Hey team, it's Greg from Body Science here. The Hydroxyburn Shred is back on shelf. It's our new therapeutic, has all the taste. And if you're looking for a better thermogenic, we've really pushed for the pursuit of a better thermogenic. Full disclosure on the labelling. What do we mean? Caffeine levels have changed. We all know the rules have changed. The ingredients have changed. The claims have changed. We have a clean label with premium quality ingredients for you. So what does that mean for you? You can look at things like metabolism, energy, sugar metabolism, fat metabolism, cognitive function, thyroid, and just general health and well-being, and it's all on the label. If you're taking a fat burner now and it doesn't say it on the label, have a look at it and go, why? Get on board. From your learnings with Bevo, and obviously he was a forward thinker, like you've really put that out there. Mm-hmm. Let's talk not the budget to run these events. I don't want to talk about that because that's no one's business. Mm-hmm. But you've got a sports budget. It's not unlimited. People think elite teams have money. They don't. They have very, very tight budgets these days.
Of course.
How did you two possibly go to a board and say, we want to start monitoring if someone's upset at home with a young child under 3? Or because obviously the first thing is looking back with time. I've been doing this for 22 years. Strength coaches were pretty hardcore dudes back in the early days. They'd done the hard yards, probably an ex-player. And, S&C has changed so much in the life. Like it's an absolutely completely different field now. How did you, as one of the pioneers here, actually go to a board and say, I actually want to take some money, or I need more money because we want to do this?
If you look at anything, and we start with corporate, the number one thing that to make your organization successful, obviously you need to employ good staff.
Absolutely.
And you need your staff to turn up.
Yep, that's
so
big thing.
Your level of absenteeism is one of the KPIs that you'd be looking at in relation to sales, promotions, whatever. So if my staff is absent, they're not here, there's a direct cost associated with that absenteeism. So if we look at sport, if I've paid for the top 25 players in the league and yet 10 of those guys are injured and they're absent, well, that causes issues with continuity with team members, bringing in new players. And so that was one of the things that we looked at with the Penrith Panthers, right? So with the research we did with the Penrith Panthers, with changing their fatigue monitoring and recovery systems, we looked at the optimal number of players for them based on where they finish on the ladder. So anytime the Panthers would use 29 players or less, guess what? They finish top 6. Every time they use 30 players or more, guess what? They finish outside the top 8.
Is that right?
So they used 33 players in 2012. Then it come down to 29 in 2014. That 2014 season, they made the major preliminary final, one win away from the grand final. Now, let's be clear. I'm not saying it's causative that if you just use less players, you are going to make the grand final.
Yep.
But we do look at associational analysis. So how much does one variable account for change in another variable? And what we were able to show was that around 75% of where they finished on the ladder, their position where they finished, 75% of that was accounted for by the number of players they used. So 2/3 of where you finish on the ladder is accounted for by the fact of whether you used more or less players. And so if you look at where that comes from, Craig Bellamy needs a lot of flowers thrown his way for what he does with that organisation. Now, with Craig in particular, I was fortunate enough to be there for 3 months with a research project with the Storm in 2008. And everyone looks at Craig, and when he goes over to Europe, he doesn't go to AC Milan or Juventus or Man U to see what they're doing in the gym or how they're training. He goes over there to say, how do you manage your players through, the UEFA Cup Series, through the Premier League, through how do you manage your group? And the better teams, the teams that constantly finish top 4, they're just better at managing their playing group. Greg,
some learnings in that.
Everyone, like you've been around the sport as long as I have, everyone lifts, everyone is in the gym, everyone's doing speed work, everyone's doing video, everyone's doing film, right? Everyone's doing, they're all training to some capacity. How many ways can I do a different power clean, right? There's variations, but essentially it's the same thing. So they're all doing this, but the teams that regularly finish top 4 use less players and they're better at managing their playing group. Now, holistically, that's where we've moved in modern times. What's happening psychologically, socially, physically? Where are we with those particular areas? So, and we talk about that in the book, and I was fortunate enough to be the head of performance at the Northern Pride for a couple of years when Joe O'Callaghan was the coach and then Ty Williams. And that was one of the first things we looked at doing. The previous year, the Northern Pride had used 35 players. And when Joe had spoke to me and said, I want to look at this high performance unit structure, and I want our squad to be a structure that would be very seamless in moving into the Cowboys. So we had a lot of consultation with the Cows and looked at the structure. That next season, they used 25 players, the least used in the ISC that next year. Once again, I'm not saying it's causative, but they've gone from using 35 players the year before with no high performance unit, no focus on monitoring and recovery management. And there's some luck involved in that, of course, no question. But you don't go from using 35 players one season to using 25 players the next season without some type of intervention.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Do you see that those learnings that you've got in place there? And I'll just step on the corporate field again if I can. Because if corporate gets into it, it means we get more money that funds everything and growth. And obviously sport is where that plays out because corporate sponsors sport. Where are we at as a nation compared to the overseas trips you just talked about in relation to monitoring our staff? Look,
there was a period there where it was all about what was happening overseas. And if you go back, and I'd strongly recommend David Martin, used to be one of the coaching staff in performance with the Philadelphia 76ers. David Martin was at the Australian Institute of Sport for like 20 years, a lot of work in cycling. And then throughout that period of time, there was this transition where what we were doing in Australia through the Australian Institute of Sport was seen as not world class, but seen as world leading, where everyone overseas, if you look at anyone in England at that stage, they would be going, Team GB, what are they doing in Australia? We need to look at what they're doing. And then we've been through that now with so many Australians who have ended up overseas, whether that be working in the NFL. At the moment, there's a multitude of Aussies working in the NBA. So they're all saying, okay, what are they doing over there that's different to what we're doing here? And for everything else even, education, process, structure, money, all that sort of stuff, I think the one area what we do well as Australian strength and conditioning coaches and performance staff is that we do have the ability of individual self-awareness as a person, and that translates into building relationships and trust with the players. And I think for any aspiring early career strength and conditioning coaches, any students at university that want to get into elite sport or corporate, you need to be able to develop those relationships and come across as being a trustful person. Simon Sinek, in his book, The Infinite Game, he writes about the Navy SEALs. And when they went through that transition of low performers, moderate performers, or high performers, initially it was to become a Navy SEAL, we want the highest level of performer we can get. That's it. And then when they went through and had a look at, okay, well, hang on, he could be the highest level of performer, but he could have the lowest level of trustworthiness amongst his peers and group. That fit is not going to happen. So when they went through that, he talks about the trust performance continuum, and they would much rather take a moderate level performer that had the highest level of trustfulness versus the highest level performer with a moderate level of trustfulness. And so that's the change. And I think that's where you're able to create buy-in, because buy-in is built on trust. And if you're looking at, well, that's what the Navy SEALs are doing and how they're trying to have an impact on trustfulness and performance, that's where we're at. And just to digress, like I didn't even get to answer your question about when we go into a corporation or an organization and say, hey, we want to invest this money into this program. But the first thing is around the return on investment, right? Yep. Like, and that's the end of the day. And that's where we go in there and say, okay, this is the plan, this is the program, these are the KPIs that we have, this is the structure we're going to run with. We're going to do that for a period of time and then we'll reassess, as opposed to coming in and saying, well, we're going to use X, system X because of my opinion. And we all know about opinions, right? They're the same as other body parts, which we all have, right? So you can't go in there with an opinion. You need to go in there with a structure and a framework. And that's where in the book, yet again, we talk about the last chapter is your championship blueprint, where we talk about frameworks of the most successful organizations. So pop quiz, Greg, right here, right now. We're going to put you on the spot. Put you on the spot, man, right here. Here it comes. So sporting team that has the most consecutive playoff appearances worldwide. We're going global. Which team do you think has the most consecutive year after year after year playoff appearances? Give me a team and a sport. You should be able to work out the sport from the team, I would assume.
Is it basketball?
Yes.
Is it the Bulls?
No.
No, okay. Well,
should I help him out here?
Yeah,
or what?
Please do.
Okay, so the previous winner of that award was the Green Bay Packers.
Okay.
Now it is basketball and it's an Australian team.
Is that right?
Perth Wildcats. The most consecutive playoff appearances.
You know what? You've actually told me that before.
I have told you that.
I know. That's the way you're looking at me.
I'm going to slap him in a second. I'm telling you.
Bad student. Bad.
Didn't read the notes when you wrote them down.
So jot them down.
But once again, so if we look at the Perth Wildcats.
And they've got travel. That's what we talked about, the travel side of that. Exactly, yeah.
Right. And that's what we said when I first started working in Perth. If you're an athlete and you want to live in Perth, the one thing you need to be able to do well is travel, right? But their organisation, everybody is aware of their values and their mission. But what the Perth Wildcats do really well with that is they attach those two things to what they call their non-negotiable behaviours. And that's the biggest part of the whole thing. If we can't get any attachment to the value and the mission with a non-negotiable behaviour, it's sort of pointless. It's like saying to
who runs that accountability? The players, or the people? Is it a coach? Is that a coach call?
I think like every coach will have their own view and opinion on how they think that should look as far as that goes. I know and I can only comment on my time there with Bevo, and then the next year was more of a research year. We're looking after research components under Trevor Gleeson. But that first year, Bevo's thing was he had a series of pods, all right, and those pods were where he looked at player development. All right, so we had a senior player group that looked after a pod, and within in that pod, they would actually have some junior players, and that pod would run down vertically. So there'd be one leader, which was a senior player, with 2 or 3 junior players. Collectively, they would come up with the team values, and then following coming up with the team values, the coach and others would come up with, okay, what is the behavior that aligns with that value? And let's look at the simplest team value that gets thrown around the most, and that is commitment.
Yep.
Right. I want commitment. Okay. What does commitment look like as a player? So for us, we look at the non-negotiable behaviors that align with that team value. So a non-negotiable behavior is first in, last out. That's a behavior. So you're going to turn up first to training and you're going to leave last at training. You're going to do the extras that you need to in the middle there somewhere. The next one is purposeful practice. So not only am I going to turn up to training, but every action I do as soon as I step on the court is purposeful. Accountability. While I'm on the court doing those purposeful actions, I'm going to make sure that I'm helping to hold others accountable within my group. So straight away, we've looked at aligning 3 non-negotiable behaviors that are in alignment with their value, which is commitment.
Yeah, nice.
So making that attachment, which I think every organization will have a mission statement, they'll have values, they'll have those things, but unless there's a non-negotiable behavior that links to those, it's very hard to instill. And everyone at the Perth Wildcats, from the front office to the people in the concession stand, to selling the jerseys, to the players, to the coaches, to the assistant coaches, to the performance staff, they all know what the values are and what are the non-negotiable behaviours that organisation require for them to be successful.
Does that get reset with new coaching?
I would assume so. Yeah. Look, and it's very individualised, right? Like, any coach that comes in and takes over will have a different structure, a different set, and there's nothing that's right or wrong. It's very individualised with every coach. What I can say is from my observations is the teams that do that really well, there is a definite link to non-negotiable behaviors within the group.
Oh, I love that. We did our values with the team. We got some psychologists in and did a whole lot of split the teams up. Didn't matter what division you worked at, what job role was, and went away and they grouped us and swapped us in and out and stuff. And after about 3 months, was it, Ash? 4 months? We came up with the values that were written by the team. And that's why I was asking you that, how often do you reset that? Because obviously we've had some staff turnover since then and all those type of things. And
that's life.
It's all handbooked and it's on walls here and stuff. But you're right. It's that those accountable, like this one cannot play out any different to what this is. And I'm interested that I'm going to chapter, was that you in your book with that?
You have to look at that. So chapter 10.
He's not telling me anything after me failing my first exam question. I know. Go on.
But back to the trust thing, and from an organisational perspective, we know as an employee, sport, corporate, whatever, the one thing you want is you want to be trusted, right? And you want to feel like your contribution is meaningful. Those two things, irrespective of the domain. And the organisations in the corporate world that show that their staff are trusted and show that their contribution, giving them some autonomy to make meaningful contributions, those organisations, the staff work in the organisation, stay for longer years and contribute more hours. And it's that trust thing, right? We all want to be heard. We all want to be trusted. We want to be seen that what we're contributing is meaningful in some way. So if you can mesh that in there, you'll end up with some really solid pillars for any organisation.
Right, I love that. So if people do want to find you, how do they find you?
So any socials, predominantly LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. So I do some work on LinkedIn. Look, I'm not a huge socials guy. A lot of my stuff, as you'll see, is reposting things that I think are meaningful of interest. But any of the social thing, the website is SPB International. So SPB International, just a .co.
.co?
Yeah, so no M. I get a lot of people saying, I sent you an email, and I'm like, I didn't get it. And they put .com, not .co. But if you just Google SPB International, you'll find that. And happy to take any questions from anybody that wants to talk shop around, what's in the book, how we decided to try and leverage the book to be meaningful in the current times. Like our goal, and we've been asked this on a lot of different mediums, what was your goal for writing the book? And it really was, we just wanted to have people read a book and for whatever time they were reading it, escape, right? Use it as a way to escape what's going on in their life, what's going on in the world, and then try and align some of their personal circumstances to what they're reading. And so that's the biggest thing. When we get feedback where people have gone, I read chapter 7 and on the 1%ers and we actually, I can relate to that. We do this. But that's the kick we get out of where we're at with the book at the moment. So it's one part of what we're doing. The other areas with the research and the high performance work with Basketball in New Zealand, the Asia Cup's coming up. So we've got the Asia Cup in September with the Tour Ferns, and then hopefully the girls will finish top 4 and then we'll qualify for the World Cup, which is going to be hosted in Sydney next year.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So Australia will be hosting the World Cup for basketball for the women. So that'll be great.
Let's finish up with the book. Where can we get it?
So on the website, or you just Google it and you'll find it online, Amazon, all of the usual places.
When Winning Matters.
When Winning Matters, just punch in When Winning Matters and Stephen Bird and you'll find where it goes, or just go straight to SPB International, the products page on the website, and you'll be able to see it on there.
Not any audio version?
Look, we've had a discussion around the audio version, and that this stage was something we're gonna look at probably next year. We'll see how we go with audio version. Our thing at the moment is we're unpacking some online learning modules that go with the book.
Good, yeah.
So with the corporate world at the moment, what we're trying to do is align an online learning module. So for example, the 1%ers that count, the staff and the organisation would do that online learning module before we would then turn up to workshop the actual chapter. So that's the next
clever
part.
to have people doing that before you turn up, because most people are getting you to do things after
the fact. Yeah. So that'll be the next thing going through.
That's awesome. So When Winning Matters, lessons learned from Sports Elite. Stephen, it was awesome to have you on. I've been a massive fan of yours for a long time.
Mate, it's been a while. I can recall Filex, I don't know how long ago. Quite a long time ago, because the listeners may or may not know that my PhD was all work around Intra workout subs. So that's where that whole thing come from in 2006 when we conducted the first lot of research on Intra workout supplements. So way back in the day. So we've shared some history for some time.
Okay, throw it out there. What's the scoop on Intra workout subs?
Well, once again, I think when we looked at doing the research initially, it was the fact that here's a time, which is usually during the workout, where nutrient status becomes compromised. post. There was a lot of sups around pre and post, but nothing during. So we looked at a 6% carb solution, 6 grams of aminos, just as a essential amino mix, and we had some significant changes in muscle cross-sectional area. So these guys were able to stick a 6 mil Bergstrom biopsy needle into their thigh, so about as big as the pen that you're holding.
That'd be nice.
Smack it in their thigh, pull out. We're going to go very technical now, so pull out a little bit of muscle, and we spend all this time and effort and energy and end up with this little thing that looks like a piece of snot. And then basically we freeze it, and then you go to the deli and they slice the Devon. Yep. So we stick it on a fancy machine like that, slice it very thinly, about 20 times thinner than a piece of hair. We then stain it, and then we can have a look at the cross-section of each of the type A, the 1A, the 1B, the 2A, the 2B fibers. So we can look at those and then determine whether they've got bigger. So we were able to do that. Now, the athletes that took the placebo, or they consumed just a 6 grams of aminos or a 6% carbs, or they got the good stuff, which was the combined group, the aminos and the carbs by themselves had a very similar increase in muscle fiber size. But when we combined them, they actually had a much greater increase in fiber size. So between the insulin factor with the carbs, we've got the aminos going into the system, obviously turning on some of those downstream molecular signals for mTOR and the pathways that create new protein within the body. That seemed to be the ticket. So
amazing.
Way back when. See how we go. But hey, we're going to give a shout out. Dr. Mac, he needs to get onto you.
Is he alive?
Yeah, mate.
He's alive, is he?
He's got to be.
He's one of the most intelligent men I've ever met.
He is a good bloke. So yeah, indeed.
And you two working together at the moment, aren't you?
We are. So Dr. Mac is the head of school at the University of Southern Queensland, and I've actually started there recently. So we've got quite a few projects that we want to look at doing as far as that goes, and talk about some potential research and see what we can do with some of the products and provide a bit more science behind them.
Mate, who's funding sports science research at the moment?
Look,
it's a tough gig at the moment.
Yeah, it is a tough gig at the moment. I think initially it was a lot from industry, right? Wanting to see different things, whether it be, vibration platforms, whether it be things like velocity-based training software. Those organizations were keen to actually have a look. And once again, I think it comes back to the organization themselves, whether they're prepared to invest to see whether the product is actually usable. So, but it's a hard gig.
It is. So we're obviously, with the world heading towards more TGA in sports nutrition versus food, I think we'll see that change a fair bit in the future, because when people start realizing how hard it is to actually put a claim on a therapeutic product, it's
absolutely
a lot of work.
Yeah, indeed. And I think, and we always, everyone talks about the first food policy in sport, and especially in major competitions. So for me, as the head of performance, walking into an organization, the brands that we deal with, I see that whole trustworthiness thing. So I need to be 100% sure what's on the label is what's in the product. And as you know, that's one of the reasons why we've tried to look at being very specific with you guys and the brands that we actually recommend to our athletes.
So grab the book, When Winning Matters. Like Steve said, he'll answer all his emails he gets. You sound like you've got a lot of spare time, mate.
Someone needs to put in a question. So, hey, we're going to stick a copy up, leave a copy here.
Yes.
If someone wants to jump on your social media with the Body Science and put in a question, we'll choose the best question and we'll send them out a copy of the book.
Did you sign it? Wow.
Yes, I did.
You did. Oh, you both did too.
Yeah, Bevo.
Wow.
Actually,
Wow.
Bevo's on there.
Double signature.
You got 2 there.
It's a keeper.
2 for the price of 1.
Nice. So this will go up in the next couple of weeks. We'll get it out there and run the little competition. Thanks for coming on board, mate. It was great.
No worries.